All right, welcome to What's Up Wandsworth. I'm here with Adrian from Belleville Brewing. Thanks so much for having me, Adrian. It would be great to just get a little rundown of how the brewery started, what you were doing, and yeah, how's it going?
So the brewery started in 2013. We've actually just sort of celebrated our 10th birthday. And I mean, it came about because I'd organised a few beer festivals at Belleville Primary School. And the history behind that being that we were quite lucky to get our first son, Jake, into the school because we don't really live in the main catchment area. And so when he did get in, I sort of vowed that I'd do as much for the school as possible and for the PTA. And I just got the idea of doing a beer festival from another school that did one. And the day that I went into sort of Sussex and Surrey to collect the beers for the festival was a bit of an epiphany. I mean, I'd grown up in Sussex, and so I remember drinking Harvey's and King and Barnes, who were the two big brewers at the time. But actually, of course, what had happened sometime in the early 2000s was that all these small little breweries had sprung up. I mean, some of them in the back of cow sheds, some of them on industrial estates, some of them sort of seemed to be in the backs of people's houses, and collected the beer and had great fun doing the festival, and then started home brewing. And that's really where it all started. I started home brewing, and the second beer festival we had, I put my beers in under a different name, and a few dads came up and said, this is really good. And when I told them that it was ours, they said, well, why don't we do something? And they're all quite sort of entrepreneurial, or, they work in the city, or they're lawyers. And so they were the sort of the catalyst for me wanting to do what I wanted to do, which was change jobs. I was working in music, and particularly film music, and it had just got a bit stale. I think I always made the pact with myself that I would work on good films for no money and bad films for lots of money, and it seemed that I was working on bad films for no money. So that's really what prompted it. And obviously finding this space, I mean, I used to live literally behind this tap room, and so that helped with the idea of starting it. Mark McGuinness Smith and I looked at this and thought, well, this would be perfect. So yeah, we started. I think that the equipment arrived at the very beginning of January, and we started brewing straight away.
Brilliant. And so how long did it take between that festival where you sold your beers for the first time and moving into this space and starting on a larger scale?
Yeah, between the last festival, I think it was about 6 months. It's a slightly tragic story, but we'd heard that a man had been killed in a brewery in New Hampshire, Red Hook. He had an accident with a pressurized keg, and it had a baby on the way. So the last beer festival we did at Belleville, I gave some of the proceeds from it to the fund to look after his child and wife. And in that holiday, we'd driven from Florida up to Maine. And so I'd had a chance to visit a few breweries. And really, it was visiting those and visiting the brewers that sort of gave me the impetus to sort of start it. So really, it was that 6 months between, I suppose, July of 2012 and January of 2013. Where it really took shape. I found a fabricator who at the time weirdly had done most of the breweries, or since did most of the breweries around South London. So, I mean, he'd done By the Horns, he did us, Clarence and Fredericks, which is no longer brewing, the Cronks, Brixton, the original Brixton brewery was by the same fabricator. So everything sort of fell into place and went from there.
Great. And so your tagline is beers from over there brewed over here. And you mentioned the US. What is the style you're going for? What's the inspiration?
Well, I mean, I suppose the point is I'm old enough to remember craft beer when it really first started. I remember, because I was working in the States at the time, particularly in Los Angeles, I remember the start of, when Fritz Maytag took over Anchor Brewing. I remember first Sierra Nevada and the first Fat Tire amber ale I ever had. And there was a wonderful brewery called Pete's Wicked Ale. Their flagship beer was an American brown ale. And when we started, and actually like anyone, you're trying to emulate those big beers that sort of first started the revolution, like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, like Anchor Steam, like Fat Tire, even Sam Adams Boston Lager. You're trying to emulate those styles. And I'm one of the very few people, I think, and I suppose it's because of my age, that understands that if it wasn't for the Americans, we wouldn't have craft beer. I mean, beer in England, and especially kegged beer, was in a pretty sorry state in the sort of 70s and 80s. Thanks to Canberra, cask beer had obviously had a resurgence and was doing well. But actually, if you think about it, we were making some truly atrocious beer during the 1970s and 80s. Things like, Watney's Red Barrel and Double Diamond and the various other appalling things that probably the hop had never been near. So, and as I said, if it wasn't for the Americans, we wouldn't have craft beer. So I'm always very happy to pay deference to them and to those guys like Sam Calagione and Ken Grossman who started it.
good to know, because I think, I don't know, maybe there's a general perception that Europeans, we know how to make beer. Americans, they do a certain style, very over the top, maybe. I don't know. But that's a great perspective. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. So starting a brewery 10 years ago, what was it like? What was something that surprised you about running it on an industrial scale?
Well, I suppose I think the first thing is how physically demanding it is. I mean, brewing's like bread making. It's one of those sort of alchemical processes that, it's 4 ingredients and suddenly something wonderful comes out of it. But a lot of hard work goes into it and a lot of science. I mean, someone interviewed me a few weeks ago and said, what would you think now if you drank one of the beers that you made, in those early days? I'd probably be absolutely appalled. But actually, and you learn as you go on. And I'm not a master brewer, and I never purported to be. And in some respects, never want to be. I always think of master brewers as people that walk around in white coats. The whole point about craft beer is it's about being adventurous. It's about pushing the boundaries of what beer is and what beer can be. And going back to certainly those 2 people, Ken Grossman and Sam Caligione from Dogfish, those are the kind of people who said, what happens if we put some cherries and some almonds in a beer? Will it be a nice Bakewell tart beer, or whatever? And I think that's what's important about craft beer, is that we're always trying to push the boundaries and we're always trying to come up with new ideas. I mean, most of them are recycled. I mean, when the Americans discovered sours, it wasn't that they were inventing them. Sours have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right.
The Cantillon has been making sours for a couple hundred years. And before that, Berliner Weisse has been around for quite a long time as well. But in terms of taking the style and actually pushing the boundaries of it, I think that's what's really interesting about being a craft brewer. And that's what excited me. I mean, I love cooking, and in some respects, the 2 things are intertwined. Mm-hmm. The idea of a Bakewell tart beer, the idea of we did a stout, a patisserie stout, which is normally a stout that's got lactose in it to make it sweet, and we made it an almond croissant beer. So, I think that those kind of things are the things that make craft beers interesting. And one of the reasons craft brewing happened in the States is because some of the more interesting breweries really had ceased trading when Prohibition started and never really came back. And then, of course, the big brewers like Budweiser and Miller, took over. And I think sort of during the 70s, it was the fact that, certain people who, thanks to legislature, had been able to homebrew, thought, there's got to be something better than this. And so, started brewing, and they were the people who really pushed things forward. And that's where we find ourselves today. And I mean, the Americans, I think, are more adventurous about it. I think the brewers are more adventurous and the drinkers are now more adventurous. And so you get this wonderful thing of being able to go into a tap room in the States and finding all this really weird and wacky stuff which people love. Unfortunately, I think in this country, we're much more conservative in our tastes. We are essentially European, and it makes us a sort of lager and pale ale drinker. So although we love brewing all the beers that we brew, and especially all the seasonals, I couldn't, for instance, say the Ballon Black Lager, which is essentially a Schwarzbier or, German dark lager. I couldn't make that core range. It just wouldn't sell enough because we just don't really drink beers like that. I couldn't take, a stout and make a stout core range, because every time I phone up the pub and say, do you want to take our stout? It's like, well, I've got Guinness. So I can't have 2 stouts on the bar.
Yeah.
And so what happens is that most breweries in this country, unfortunately, end up with this core range that is essentially a lager, a pale ale, a session IPA, and a big IPA. And that, if you look at almost every single brewery around, that's their core range, because that's what sells in this country.
Yeah. Do you think that is shaped by how the drinking culture looks like, what the distribution looks like? People go to the pub cater to a sort of general, a base level of beer drinking. Whereas, in the US, I remember I was there last year, I had a pickle beer.
Excellent, yeah.
I like trying it. We're probably not going to buy a 6-pack of it.
No,
down
exactly.
6 of them. But I tried something new. And I don't know, the Americans obviously don't have the same pub culture. They definitely go to bars. But I don't know why they are able to, maybe their distribution working slightly different.
The thing about it is that most breweries in the States don't worry about distribution. The model is that you open a little craft brewery in the States and you have a tap room with a pizza oven in the corner. And really you just sell your beers, A, in your particular area, to your local drinkers, and you don't get involved in distribution. I mean, getting involved in distribution in the States is a really difficult thing.
Okay.
Since Prohibition, the only way to sell your beer properly in the States is through a distributor. And you have to get a distributor on board, otherwise you can't sell. So the model that works, I think, for most countries in the States is that they open a brewery, it's got a tap room, and they sell their beer there. I went to a very good one, an amazing brewery in a place called Roswell, which is in just north of Georgia, just north of Atlanta in Georgia. And tried some amazing beers. And when I said, if you stick a pallet together, I'll have it shipped over, he said, well, the beer doesn't really leave the brewery. It only leaves in people's stomachs. They make crowlers, which are like big cans, and the rest of the time everything's drunk on the premises. And that's one way of circumventing the whole thing of having to get involved in distributors. In this country, unfortunately, we're up against the big guys, the Heinekens and the Molson Coors and the AB InBevs, and they're the people that essentially own most of the taps. So it's up to craft beer to find, and thanks to the independent pubs that exist, it's up to us to find the places to sell our beer. And you'll never ever be able to budge the likes of those mega breweries because of the hold they have on the market. AB InBev is the biggest brewer in the world, most of the biggest brands in the world.
And indeed, I've bought quite a lot of young brands, or craft beer brands, and
yes, I mean, they bought Meantime first in this country, and then they bought Camden, and then the Monopolies Commission came calling, so they had to get rid of it. Meantime, it's very sad in a way what's happened to Meantime. This has sort of got pushed off to the side and got bought by Asahi, and they've never really been the same again. In some respects, they were the brewery that almost started it all in this country. But I mean, you've got this slight problem at the moment in this country that you've got AB InBev with Camden, and you've got Heineken obviously owning, I think, half of Beavertown and all of Brixton, and trying to get your beers in alongside is hard.
Yeah. What does it look like for you in terms of, you obviously have your tap room, but I'm guessing you don't sell everything here?
No, but actually, it's funny actually, because the tap room came quite late. I mean, I think we started brewing in 2013, and the tap room didn't come along until 2016, late 2016. But it's been such fun, the tap room, and it allows for much more scope. It allows us to try out beers, and allows us to get instant feedback from customers about what they think about the beers. And it's nice sort of being part of the community. I mean, I think we were before, but ultimately seeing people come here, and especially in the summer, is great. And so, without the tap room, I don't know if it could survive, and especially post-COVID, with the hospitality industry in England, full stop, certainly in London, is not doing particularly well, and certainly the beer traders. And so having the tap room just helps us to keep our head above water.
Right, okay. What percentage do you sell here versus other channels?
In terms of the beer, it's only about 30% of probably the beer at the tap room. But that 30% is not more important, but it's very important that we have it.
Yeah.
Especially because selling to pubs is a very sort of movement phase. You can never have all the pubs that you want all the time. You'll fall out of fashion, you'll fall out of favour with certain pubs, then you'll go to others, then you'll come back. We've got quite a few pubs where we've sold to, then had 6 months off, then sold to again for a period of time. So, the tap room for me is really important, and particularly the size. I mean, I would love to be in every pub in a 5-mile radius and just say, right, that's it. We're a Balham, Clapham, Tooting, Wandsworth, Battersea kind of brewery, and that's all we want to do. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work. The nearest brewery, the nearest pub to us is a Mitchells and Butler pub. We don't sell. Next nearest is a City Pub Company. We don't sell to those. The next nearest is Young's, and we don't sell to those. So, you can't have that kind of strong heartland which you want. And so weirdly, one of the things I will say is that I do understand now how strong our heartland is. And the reason I understand that is because we had an amazing COVID. We had all the things that you needed to get by. We didn't lose beer because it's mostly keg and not cask. We had just had a massive consignment of cans just before, literally on the 22nd of March.
Right.
And so we managed to get everything we had in tank into can. I found a way of getting all the kegs back into conditioning tanks so we could can those. So we didn't have any losses of beer, and we just spent all of our time going around South London delivering beer. And through that, realised where our heartland it's at. There's not a street in Wandsworth probably that I don't know now. And that's a lovely thing to have. So we kind of know where we're strong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Admittedly, a lot of those were people that would have come to the taproom anyway if they could.
Yeah.
But it was nice being able to see, geographically where we're strongest. We weren't selling a lot of beer at Tottenham, put it that way.
So people who want to drink your beer definitely come to the tap room. They can pick up a couple of cans from here as well. They can also buy online. But where is the closest pub to the shout out?
So I'd say, I'm going to champion my two favourites. And actually, it's been a favourite for a long time. David the Eagle is a lovely guy and home brewed with me when I was home brewing. Wrote a great book about brewing, and he takes steam lager, and I'm totally gobsmacked at that and how well he does do. But it's a very, very, very busy pub. If I'm going to drink cask beer, I'm going to drink it there because I know it's fresh. And he's just up Northcote Road. And then the other person I'd champion is probably Firefly. Funnily enough, another day for Firefly, who takes our beers. And they're probably the two closest. I almost don't have to phone them. It's week in, week out, they order the beer from us. And they're both nice people, and they both have great bars. And actually, that's the thing that I like about this job the most, is working with really nice people. I try not to work with people I don't like.
That's good. That's good to live by. But easier when you're successful, like maybe at the start you had to swallow.
Yeah, I think you set your boundaries, and I'm old enough to know that I'm probably saving myself a lot of frailty if I don't sell to people that either don't respect us and don't really like us or just want a deal.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, thanks for that. That's very, very interesting. So I was going to ask about, what trends you're seeing, and, people talk about low alcohol and less drinking among younger people, etc. So on, which is interesting, and like to hear your thoughts on that. But I guess it feels like what you shared about where you came from and so on, you also want to show that beer drinking can be something different from what it was, and maybe we don't hit low alcohol beer. I don't know. What do you think about that?
The thing is, I don't have anything against low alcohol beer. It's not something that interests me at all. Mm-hmm. And the slight problem with it is, I think that, I've had a few low alcohol beers. Most of it I've thought is appalling. But that's also because I'm not prepared to make the compromise of drinking low alcohol beer.
Yeah.
And they are mostly really just massive marketing ploys. I'm sure some of them are decent, but actually it's just all about making something, getting it out there in the marketplace. What I see more of is not so much drinking low and no alcohol. I see more and more youngsters drinking less vodka but wanting to drink better quality. When I was 18 and playing rugby and sort of going down the pub, we'd think nothing of sinking sort of 5 or 6 pints. I would never do that now, and in actual fact, most of the people that I know, or most of the young people I know, including my 2 sons, would rather drink better beer and drink maybe 3 pints. So what I'm seeing more of actually is youngsters doing just that. Maybe almost actually the way that the Belgians drink. You can't go to Belgium and sink 5 or 6 pints because you'll be on your back. But you drink 2 or 3 bottles, and they're normally 6 to 8% or something, and that's it. So you're drinking sort of more like wine. So what I'm seeing more and more of is less volume but better quality, and that suits me fine. I think that's a great way to drink. And and beers with much more taste and much more character, which I think is important as well. So that falls into exactly what craft brewing is about, trying to create beers that have got a bit more character to them.
You mentioned the Heartland, you mentioned Wandsworth, knowing all the streets and so on. What's some good things about being here? You've been here since you started.
I've been here pretty much all the time I've been in London. When I first moved up to London in 1983, I lived in Wandsworth, I moved to Wimbledon Park, I moved here, I moved to Wellsfield. Where else have I lived? And moved to Wimbledon, then moved back here, and I've stayed around Ballon. Weirdly, one of the things about the brewery and certainly doing deliveries is that I have obviously visited a lot of other parts of London, and although I sort of dismiss them, there's no doubt about it that there are different parts of North London, but I just am a South London boy, and I love Wandsworth. It's been a great area to bring up kids. That's the first thing, and it is a very child-friendly area. It's close to most of my family who still live down in Sussex, and so that makes it much easier to get out to them if I want. But I think a lot of green spaces we've got, I wouldn't say it's as edgy as I would like it to be. You can't go to many places and find good deals on weird and wacky, interesting food that you can in parts of North South London.
Yeah.
But we have great bars, there's great restaurants, great open spaces. There's great sport around. I used to be a coach at Battersea Ironside when my boys were there. I played hockey around here. I practiced karate around here. So I think it's a nice area. And I think I once thought about moving to Barnes. And the problem with Barnes is you might as well be in the middle of Surrey. Whereas the thing here is that although I feel as though I'm in London, but it's slightly slower than the middle of town, and yet if I want to, I can hop on a northern line and be in town in 25 minutes. And I think that's one of the nice things about media that I really enjoy. I think that you have to, even if you live in Wandsworth or Merton or any of these places, the nice thing about it is, and the thing that makes it worthwhile living in London is when you do go into town and you go somewhere that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't live so close. Took my two boys to a Korean hot dog restaurant a couple of weeks ago. We loved it. It's something new and exciting. Or if I want to go to the Tate Modern or see something, it's, a hop, skip and a jump away. That's what makes this a fun place.
Yeah. From a business perspective, what are some positives, maybe some challenges?
Yeah, there's lots of challenges. I mean, our rent here is astronomical. We are in a very affluent area, and our rent reflects that.
Which is interesting because you are in one of the few light industrial parks that are around, and presumably.
Well, it's a bit of an anomaly, this, in that the landlord did try several times to get planning permission to turn this into residential and failed each time. And I'm not quite sure why. In fact, no one's quite sure why, other than the fact that certainly our customers were quite vociferous about wanting the estate to remain. And the trouble is, if you get rid of all these things, it's a case of always having to go out of town if you want something. I mean, we've got a great feel here. We've got some really nice people along this estate. And I think that keeping these is really important. We've lost enough already. So, you've got to have some of this kind of stuff. Otherwise, it just becomes a desert of light industry and of manufacturing. And that's not right. Yeah. So I'm very glad that we've been able to stay. And like I said, it's expensive. I think that's one thing. I think, the other thing about opening the brewery here, I remember speaking to someone else who has since moved out of London. But when they started, said, it must have been out of our minds opening a brewery in Young's Heart. Because, of course, the old brewery was just down the road. I never really felt that. I suppose simply because I never wanted to make the kind of beers that Young's made. So it didn't really bother me. Other than there are an awful lot of Young's pubs, so if you don't sell to them, then you've got to find somewhere else.
Yeah, but maybe you were never really going to sell to them. They weren't going to be your main channel.
No, I mean, we have sold to them in the past, but, their whole USP has changed really over the years. The estate is worth billions probably, and they've changed some of them into hotels. They are what they are, and I wouldn't not sell to them. They have some great pubs, but they are not essentially that interested in craft beer.
Yeah, so obviously rent with where you are. Anything else? Any other challenges?
No, I don't think there are. I mean, if we really felt there were more challenges than that, we'd probably move out. But I love being here. I love having the taproom here. I love the fact the taproom is next to Wandsworth Common train station, which is one stop from pretty much the busiest train station on the planet. And so that makes it easy to access as well, and means that we get good footfall here. I mean, I can't really ever see myself wanting to move the brewery. I think if we did, it would be a different brewery. I mean, we don't have a huge amount to do with the school anymore, but I'm always seeing people who were at the school, and I'm always seeing people who, because of what we're called, or rather they know us because of what we're called, they understand how we came about. And probably would have been better for us to call ourselves something London, Thames Brewing Company or something like that. I don't know, whatever. I'm not sure Westminster Brewing Company has quite the ring it needs, but I like the fact that we are, the way in which we came about. It was a very sort of serendipitous and organic way in which I just literally spoke to a few dads in the playground who said, "Oh, that's a great idea. Stick me in for $5,000.
Great. Anything else you want to mention in terms of right now, if people were to come down, anything they should look out for, any special brews?
Oh, yeah. So we've always had the sort of seasonal beers. We try and brew 2 or 3 beers every season. In fact, literally just been canning today. So our 3 beers for the spring are Beach Bunny Pale Ale, which is an Australian pale ale. Australian because we use Galaxy hops from Tasmania. So that's great fun. Mainline New England IPA, Maine with an E, as in the state, which is our big East Coast 6% beer with Citra Mosaic hops. And we've got our first sour of the season, which is Goza. So Gozas are a German invention, so called because they were originally brewed from water from the Goslar River, which is quite saline. So a Goza is a sour with added salt, and ours has got grapefruit zest in it. So that's quite fun. So those are our 3 spring beers. As I said, we try and bring out 3 seasonals for each of the seasons. And then throughout, we always try and have a couple of beers that are sort of specials that we brew maybe once and never ever again. So we've had great fun brewing a mojito sour with lime and mint, the patisserie stout I told you about. I think one of the ones that didn't work was I tried to take our dark lager and infuse it with Coca-Cola flavor, which I thought was going to be the idea to make me a millionaire, but unfortunately everyone hated it. But I mean, certainly there'll be others along the way. I mean, that's the nice thing, is if we get an idea and I think it's a great idea, we'll do it. There's nothing to stop us just going, yeah, fine with this. I mean, we've got to find a label and keg clip, and that's about it.
That's it. All right. Well, thanks for the pitch, Adrian.
Pleasure.